Today, my guest and I discuss Realms of Understreet, game mastering, and much, much more.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the show where we learn how to become better game masters and better role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. It is my intention to bring you a fascinating conversation with a game master, a role player, a game designer, a filmmaker, a historian, an archaeologist, or other interesting person each and every week. Okay, you can find the show notes for these episodes at dicegeeks.com. But before you head over there, let's get into today's interview. My guest today is game designer and founder of Crypt Monkey Studios, Ty Rucker. Ty, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Why don't you just start off? Why don't you just tell us, when were you introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
This would have been in the early 90s. I was a couple of years out of high school, and it was a little bit different then for role-playing games. So I was also a musician for a long time, for about 20 years. So that was my other geekdom. And the thing is with playing music, I found that I could still get dates. So I was a little bit older than a lot of people I knew before I got into role-playing. I didn't do it in high school and stuff like that, but I was always sort of quietly interested. Mm-hmm. And then by the time I hit about 20 or 21, I kind of didn't care as much about what other people thought of me. So I jumped in about then with D&D 2nd edition is what we were playing at that time, or Dungeons & Dragons Advanced. But then it was just sort of like a whirlwind. For the first couple of years that I started playing, I played so many things. I played GURPS, I played Vampire and Werewolf and so many things. It was a lot of fun. We played one that I know a lot of people probably haven't heard of called Heavy Ordnance. Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
So it was one of the early sort of rules light games from the late 90s or early 2000s. I don't remember exactly when it came out. One of our buddies got it off of the web, and you play a bunch of grade schoolers, or like up to 8th grade or 7th grade or something like that was the oldest you could play. And hey, everybody, there's a zombie apocalypse and you're stuck in the school, but hey, right next door is this military arsenal.
Well, there you go.
So it was one of those things where you weren't expected to probably live past 1 or 2 games. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we played a lot of things, and role playing especially. I mean, I play a lot of board games and stuff like that too, but role playing especially has captured me and my family for years.
Mm-hmm. Does your whole family play?
My son is more into video games, but both of my daughters and my wife, we all play tabletop role playing games and board games and card games and all that good stuff. He will play. My son will play, but he prefers video games.
Now, I take it you run a lot of games. Is that correct?
Yeah, I run your games, as as well. Realms of Understreet is the main game that I run for our group of friends, and it's probably going to remain that way for a little bit while longer. I'm working on a role-playing game. We'll have to start testing it soon, but most of the time what we've been playing is Realms of Understreet if we're not playing board games.
Well, that's incredible. Of course, that you play a setting that I created. We'll come back to that here in just a little bit. But one question that I've been asking kind of everybody that I've been interviewing that is a role player, that as a game master, what do you do to prepare for a session?
Well, when it comes to things where I have like a campaign, I think like most people, I'll sit down and I'll write all of my bullet points, if you will. I use a tool called Scrivener. I don't know if you've ever listened or used that rather.
I haven't used it, but I know what it is, certainly.
Yeah, that is a great tool for being able to like break up all of your thoughts and ideas and maybe even, name sections as pieces on the map or people or something like that. It's a really good tool, but I'll do stuff like that. And then before that, even I start preparing by doing things like watching the news. If something's going on the world stage, for instance, mm-hmm. It's probably something that you can add some intrigue with those ideas to your game that way too. Is just what's the big conflict or what's the big political drama or something like that, and just sort of mold it to whatever kind of story I want to tell. Yeah, those are probably the main things. I sit down, I do my bullet points for whatever my idea is, and I watch TV and I watch the news.
Yeah. So do you spend then a lot of time? Do you like to plan everything out, or do you kind of improvise?
So I can do either, I guess. The Realms of Understreet stuff, I had a really clear idea of the story in Realms I wanted to tell, so I've prepared a lot for those games. But most of my games in the last 20, 25 years that I've been running role-playing games are make-em-ups. Mm-hmm. I think it got to a point early in my I'm going to run the game career. I realized that the best laid plans are probably going to be laid to waste by the players. Mm-hmm. So I got pretty good pretty early on of just pretending like, oh yeah, I meant to do that. So I think a lot of people thought I had things planned, but I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm the guy who just wrote a book called The No Prep Gamemaster. So you probably know where I kind of fall in this whole thing. But yeah. Yeah. So that's, I just try to figure out, when people start playing games and stuff, why did you start running more than playing?
Well, before I was playing tabletop games, I'd already started writing. Initially, as I was just coming out of high school, I thought that's what I was going to do, that I was going to be a novelist. So I'd been writing probably since 6th or 7th grade. And being able to run the game, not only do I get to enjoy playing a game, but I'm running that story as well. I mean, it's obviously it's collaborative and other people get to jump in, and that's a beautiful part of it too. That's probably the main reason I liked running the games was not only was I telling a story, but we were telling a story.
You've mentioned it already, but Realms of Understreet, we kind of met through kind of a unique circumstance. So just for the listeners to kind of catch them up. So I don't know, it was a few years ago now, but I released a campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition called Realms of Understreet. Kind of my capsule description is fantasy kingdoms of rats that live under modern day Manhattan Island. I was just pretty new at self-publishing and putting out campaign settings and putting out books. Kind of all of the sudden, I start seeing on Twitter that there are some people who are actually playing in my campaign setting. I was blown away by it because I didn't think that really anybody would be, playing my games just because I didn't really know how to get them in front of people. I was still learning how to kind of get them out and get them in front of people. So I kept seeing this group of people come up on Twitter talking about playing Realms of Understreet. And of course, that was you and your gaming group. And then once I released the paperback, I asked you if I could send you a complimentary copy because you were always tweeting about my game. And then come to find out, we actually only live about 35 or 40 minutes apart from each other, which kind of blew my mind. And so now I've run into you at a few conventions, and I am just really interested to hear, how did you discover Realms of Understreet?
I followed you. Of course, I'm sure you didn't know it at the time, but I was already following you on Twitter.
Okay.
And I had seen, honestly, I don't remember for sure because it has been a couple of years, but I'm pretty sure it was a link to Drive-Thru RPG, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, that sounds interesting. And I went over and looked at it. And being that I was a little kid in the 1980s, one of my favorite movies from that time period was The Secret of NIMH.
Yeah.
And this sounded very much, and certainly you could play Realms in a different way, but this sounded like something I could use to play in a world like that. That was sort of realistic. It's got a little bit of darkness to it. It's magical. So it just captured my imagination right away. And the description of how you come about getting equipment and gear and your weapons and all of that stuff, and this need to kind of reimagine things that we as human beings think of as trash and stuff like that. It just really, it called to me, and I said, I can do something like this if I can just find a couple of people that want to play something anthropomorphic, because that's not real easy all the time.
Yeah, sure.
But my group, actually, the group that I've been running for Realms, they didn't have a problem with it. They also, I don't think at the time most or any of them were in any other games at that moment. So I think they were probably like, well, let's see how we like it. And I think that they're all addicted. We've played other things since then, but everybody wants to go back and play their rats and mice and salamanders.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should say it's Realms of Understreet is kind of a direct conversion over. So humans are rats, halflings are mice, dragonborn are salamanders. I guess, can you just kind of fill us in a little bit on what your campaign is like?
Yeah. So what I've done is I've started everybody out in the north of the island, in the Inwood Park area, which is mostly like tribal mice. And I'm sorry if I step on any of your ideas. I'm sure that I have changed things. Feel free to smack my hand.
Oh, that's totally fine.
So what I kind of did, since it's this tribal community up there, is I started everybody off in this coming of age ceremony, basically, where you randomly are placed, there's air quotes around your net, randomly placed with a group of people, and you're basically set on a quest where you're going to start in this one area. And the first part of it is you just have to go down in this relatively dangerous gorge area in this cave system and spend the night. Or maybe it was 3 days. It's been a while. I'm sorry, but you get to spend a certain amount of time down there and survive. That's your first test. And then you come back to where this temporary village. It's a temporary village that's set up once a year for everybody to go through these trials. And then you have another phase of your trials that you go through, and then your last phase is a journey from where this temporary village is over to and it just lost the name of the Waterworks. Is that the name of the near the Snapping Dragon or something? Well, anyway,
yeah,
you have to travel to the Snapping Dragon eventually, is what you're working on.
Yeah,
and what you're doing all of this for is that in the north, and only in the north, there's this idea of, if you want to be an adventurer who's going to be able to legitimately pick up jobs from people in the upper part of the island, you're kind of looked on better and more likely to get these jobs if you've successfully gone through these trials. So it's sort of like you're earning your I'm a grown-up quester badge. And then, of course, I have some other side quest things that are buried into this coming of age thing. And all of my players have gotten through this portion of it, and they're actually moving on to now this is my career. I've finished my certificate program in being an adventurer. So that's what they're working on now. They're probably, unless they change their mind, which they always could, they're probably about to head above ground into Inwood Park, and that's obviously going to be very dangerous for them.
No, that sounds great. So you've been playing, though, pretty consistently for the last few years?
So this year has been rough. We were playing consistently once a month, which for anybody over the age of 30, you probably know that's tough sometimes.
Yeah.
Kids and work and all that stuff, it gets difficult. So once a month was pretty good for us. This year's been rough because of just different family things going on. One of the biggest things is my son's in the Army now, so we've had to make trips back and forth to Georgia and things like that. But And then, of course, a couple other things, like we have a Kickstarter that we're working on finishing up right now that is unfortunately late, but if any backers are listening, we're working on it.
I guess, yeah, that I'm still just kind of, trying to get my head around that, other people play a game that I made, that play a setting that I created. So it is interesting to hear you talk about that. I guess, yeah.
If I may, I've also, and I don't know if this is something you intended, but one of the things that I've done to make it interesting / hard on them is this idea that wealth is incredibly rare. That really, if you have wealth, you're probably royalty or something like that. And if you're not royalty and you're wealthy, you probably have a target on your back, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I've done some things that have made them wealthy, and it is like really stressful for them because they're trying to hide their gems and stuff like that because they know everybody else is just bartering,
Mm-hmm. I guess just some basic information. How many players do you have?
I have 5 players.
You have 5 players. Mm-hmm. And did they take some of the original backgrounds, the Lost Pet or the Escape Lab Rat?
I believe they did, and I don't remember who took what. In fact, I don't think anybody did take Escape Lab, because I was kind of pushing that one, like, maybe you can know what they're saying. But my wizard might have. I might be remembering that wrong. Okay. It's probably one of those things that'll get sprung on me, like, oh, well, guess what I can do? And I'll be like, darn.
Yeah. I can understand English. Yeah. No, I just find it so cool that you guys are playing Realms of Understreet. So I really thank you guys, and I appreciate it, because that means a lot when you're creating things kind of alone, and then kind of just release them out into the world, and then to actually see people pick them up. So I really appreciate you guys playing that, and I'm glad to hear that you are having fun with it. Could you tell us about Crypt Monkey Studios?
Okay. So Crypt Monkey is our game company, and we do darker games. We do, even the fantasy stuff that we talk about working on is going to end up with what I say has like a thread of darkness going through it. The things that we've released so far are just outright dark. Our first game, Jack the Ripper, obviously, it's about murder. So that's pretty dark.
A little dark.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that we do. And I enjoy, being a fan of horror and apocalyptic genres and stuff like that. I obviously don't think that there's enough scary games and stuff out there. I like the spooky and the creepy. So that's probably why we decided we're just going to focus in on the darker side of storytelling.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more about Jack the Ripper, your game?
Yeah, Jack the Ripper is a bluffing, hidden identity slugfest. So the idea is that you're in 1888 London, and you are on a scavenger hunt. And your team is just about to get their last item of the night, and then they get to rush back to the party and claim victory. And then you're stuck in this old dark brick-making warehouse, and realize that one of your party members is Jack the Ripper, and you don't know who it is. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a character card. You're either Jack the Ripper or you're one of the scavenger hunters, and you play with your card face down, your character card face down. And then the items that you use to protect yourself with are all the items from your scavenger hunt. So you don't have like guns and knives and stuff like that. Instead, you're protecting yourself with a copy of Grimm Fairy Tales. So yeah, it's a really fast game. It's if it takes longer than 15 minutes, you probably got up to go make a sandwich or something. It's super fast. You can play 3 to 5 players, and that one we're actually working on a booster pack expansion that's going to let us play 3 to 6 players. And that 6th player is not another scavenger hunter. It's another bad guy. So it's going to add some more tension to the game, I think.
Uh-huh. Now, Where did the idea of Jack the Ripper come from?
So I worked on Jack the Ripper with three of my friends. That was Anthony Morris, James Paul Goff, and John Watson. One night after we were done with a Pathfinder session, James Paul Goff and I were standing outside and we were talking and we said, why don't we actually, he put the challenge forward. Let's see if we can come up with some game ideas. And I don't think I slept that night. When by the time I got home, I was writing down notes for all the different ideas I had. But one of the ideas that really intrigued me on the way home was doing something that was hidden identity and bluffing based. Because I really like those. I mean, I always say that Jack the Ripper's granddaddy is the werewolf party game. Mm-hmm. And I always like that intrigue part of it, of trying to figure out who's who, but I didn't necessarily like the vote you off the island sort of method that it uses, like everybody points at somebody and, well, that person's out of the game. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I want to do something that A, you have life points, and B, has a really good story that's intriguing. What's a good, who are you story? And I thought, wow, Jack the Ripper would be great because we still don't know who it is, or if it was a guy, or if it was a nurse, or, we don't know who it was. So I never even swayed from that story idea, actually, once we started working on the hidden identity, the mechanics and things like that.
And how did you find the process of actually like coming up with the rules and making it a playable game?
How did I find it? Well, my trade is actually in real life. I'm a software developer. So I didn't find, it wasn't alien to me, putting a structure of rules together. Okay. And working on a team wasn't really alien to me, probably for that same reason. So it's not that isn't the part I found difficult. I guess the part I found difficult was the iterations, because when I build a piece of software, I can just kind of press a button oftentimes for testing if I want to put it through iterations. Mm-hmm. With a game, the iterations are sit down and play it over and over and over again, and tweak this and pull this out, and let's throw this in and see what happens. And so I think it's kind of a love-hate thing, that part of it for me.
How long did it take you to from idea to finished product?
3 years. That was a big thing about working in a group. Everybody has different ideas, and you also all have to, like we talked about, it's hard to get together for a gaming session. It's even harder to get somebody together every week, once a week even, to work on something like that, mm-hmm. while everybody's going to work and doing their regular life thing. Mm-hmm. So it took a while, but the testing really made it worthwhile. I think the game is simple. It's easy to teach people. Mm-hmm. And that really came down to testing it so hard for so long before we finally did something with it.
So then when you have a finished game, what do you do with it then?
Oh, well, I think you have to figure out what you want to do with it, right? Especially nowadays, there's so many outlets, whether you're going to put a sell sheet together and go to one of these expos or something and try to get a large company to sign the game for you, or if you're going to self-publish and go through a route like Drive-Through RPG or through I'm trying to think of what the other the prototyping company, the Game Crafter. You can put games together on your own there. Or if you're specific to something like Dungeons and Dragons, you can go through their I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head now, but they've got their own thing that's sort of like
DM's Guild.
That's it. Yeah. So I think you probably want to figure out what you want to do with it first, and then it's just start making your bullet points. Who do I talk to? Who do I call? Who do I email? And for us, because we wanted to be a publishing company, it really came down to starting out with, how are we going to get this printed? Well, I guess I shouldn't say that's how it started. It started with, let's go to Kickstarter and see if we can get people interested and want to help us make this game happen.
Did you run a Kickstarter for it?
We ran 2 Kickstarters for Jack the Ripper. The first one was not successful, and the second one was successful.
Okay. What was the difference between the two, you think?
The first one, I think the major difference was we didn't get out there and talk about it enough, soon enough. I think by the time I was doing interviews, we were only a week away from opening the Kickstarter. It was very close. Not a lot of time for things to get any traction or buzz going at all. And the second time we started months before the start of the Kickstarter.
And so I guess which route did you guys take? Did you self-publish or did you do something else?
Yeah, Dawn and I think we must be gluttons for punishment because we decided instead of just going a studio or a designer route and trying to get on with a big company, we decided we want to be a little company at least, if not a bigger company someday. So we went the self-publishing route. That's probably because I'm a control freak too, and I want to make sure that I keep as many of those dark nuggets as I want in there, you know.
Okay. Do you have any other games?
House of Possession we're actually working on getting the production done on that now. That was a successful Kickstarter. Unfortunately, we're late. So that was one of our little learning curves right there. Is Jack the Ripper was just a card game. We had some add-on components, which we actually sell in the set now, that includes a neoprene mat and some glass beads and some fun stuff like that. But that in comparison to putting all the little bits and bobs together for a board game, which is what House of Possession is considerably different. So that's kind of what's slowed us down. That and some other things that have gone on this year, when, you know, some poor choices on my part of prioritizing other things ahead of it, maybe that sort of stuff. But it's still a pretty neat experience, and that should be done soon, even though it hurts a little bit right now.
So what is that game like? You said it was a board game?
Yeah, it's a race board game. So if you wonder what a race board game is, you can think all the way back to Sorry.
Okay.
Or games like Witch's Way or things like that, where you basically you have a starting point and you follow a track and you want to try to get to the end of that track before anybody else. But of course, I'm weird, so we didn't use a track. It's still a race board game, but instead, the idea behind House of Possession is that you were at this dinner party, and just as everybody's about to, toast their last toast and jump in the car and head home, all these demons start jumping out, and they're like, "No, everybody's not going home. One of you gets to leave, and the rest of you are going to remain here as the food and playthings of demons for all eternity." So the rage part of it is that you're trying to collect these exits inside of this big Victorian mansion that you're in. So you started out on the 3rd floor and you're trying to get down to the bottom floor and off the property. And as you're playing the game, you collect these exits and you can attach boons to the exits to try and protect them and to pump them up even more to get more exit points. And the first person who gets 10 exit points before anybody else is the one person that gets to escape the house.
Okay.
So instead of a track on the board, what we did is the idea being that you're sort of running through this house and there's some magic and mysticism involved. So yeah, you think you're about to run out the front door, but no, you're back on the 3rd floor and you just walked out of a closet. The floor,
that's
way
evil, Ty. That is evil.
Yeah, it is. So the way you use the board is we have wood and metal materials are on the exits that you want to play. So if you want to play a metal exit, you go to a room that has a metal influence. It's just got a metal border around it, or it has a wood border around it. And that's how you play your exits on your turn. So the board, you kind of hop around to these different rooms, and we've got a creepy little doll that we call the haunt token. You're trying to avoid being possessed because it's also an event-based game, and we have these possession event cards that are flipped over at certain times. So, yeah, it's a horror bonanza.
Oh, it sounds great. But so far, you've told me about a card game and a board game. What about a role-playing game? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so that's actually my focus for the next couple of years. For the next couple of years, I'm going to help out Dawn and Cora. That's my wife and my daughter. They're working on the board game side of the company and the card game side of the company, and story games. They're working on a story game right now. And I'm going to be working on our role-playing game, which is The Dark After. It's an apocalyptic genre. And that's pretty much my focus for a few years now. But I'm glad I've got them to work on the other parts of our company while I focus on that.
Okay. Can you tell us any more about Dark After? Or is it a secret?
So a lot of it is at the moment because unfortunately the vision, I initially I wanted to try and use another system or license another system, but my vision for the game is just not going to allow me to do that, unfortunately. So I'm working on that as well. So those bits, at least, I should probably shut up about. But story-wise, I can tell you that the idea is that there's a cataclysm that's going on, not like a meteorite or anything. It's an illness, but it's worldwide. It's devastating, and the leaders of the world's countries are trying to figure out ways of doing something to subside this, something to slow down the growth rate of the illness. And I'm going to be a little bit mysterious here. They do decide to do something, or I should say the United States decides to do something unilaterally. Good intentions and all that, but the effects of what they try to do are even more devastating. So you still have people that are dying from this illness, and you also end up shutting the world down, so to speak. So in doing so, you kind of stick us back in the dark ages, in a sense. So the idea behind it is that not only did they turn off the power, but by doing that, they altered some of us. And in altering some of us, we get some nifty things out of it as players. So that, this is why you want to play the game. You get some abilities like the basic abilities are things like telekinesis, pyrokinesis, telepathy and empathy and that sort of stuff. So yeah, the idea behind the game is the world as you knew it has been flipped on its head. There's fewer people, but there's more of other things that are spooky. And you're trying to make your way through the world and trying to do your best to try and hopefully, well, either that, I guess it's up to you. You're either trying to help the world get a little bit back to where it was, or you're just taking advantage of the new world order, one or the other.
Okay. You said it was like apocalyptic, maybe just generally, but what are some of your influences? Are you a fan of post-apocalyptic movies or books and things like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Actually I bought Anarchy from you. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
yeah, too.
Pretty much if it's apocalyptic, I can reach it, I'm gonna pull it back to me. We were talking about Steel Dawn earlier offline. That was one of my favorites when I was a kid, and Red Dawn, of course, also Patrick Swayze.
Yeah.
And then later on, things like Stephen King wrote a novel called The Stand that I'm sure lots of people have heard of, and in the early '90s they did a miniseries of that. That was one of my favorite ones. That one was that was my first big influence for I would like to do a game like this. But then other movies too, like Night of the Comet.
Okay.
I know I keep going back to really old movies, but obviously those were my
I'm fine with
years.
that.
And certainly in the modern day, you look at things like The Walking Dead, which I love. This is one of my. I was not a fan of ER. I know that upsets a lot of people, but I am quite happy. There's my wife giving me a raspberry in the background. She loved ER. But I always felt like that was too real. And when I sit down to watch television, I want to see something fantastic or horrible or something not like my everyday.
Yeah.
So things like The Walking Dead have been a big influence, and Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And we were talking before we started the interview about Steel Dawn because I've interviewed Doug Leffler, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this episode as well, so people can hear me talk to the screenwriter of Steel Dawn, which I almost like lost it just talking to him. Like I just like if you want to know what geek out means, that was me during that interview, because as you mentioned, I released Anarchy, which is a post-apocalyptic campaign setting for the Open D6 system. I am a huge fan of 80s post-apocalyptic, mainly post-nuclear, but there's a lot of other ones as well. So Mad Max, and kind of just down the line from Mad Max to Steel Dawn to Warlords of the 21st Century to The Blood of Heroes, just kind of goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I loved all the Romero films too, from 70s and 80s. Yeah, wonderful.
All right. Well, that sounds great. So now your game is, what was it called again?
The Dark After.
The Dark After. Are you going to run a Kickstarter for that one?
We're so far out from it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, my gut is yes, we probably will either run it for the initial core system, or maybe we'll do something for later resources, supplements, that sort of stuff. I'm not really sure. Being so far away from it, it's hard for me to even think of that until I've had some people testing it.
Sure. I guess, we're kind of running here up against time, but are you working on anything else? Are there any other projects that you're working on?
Well, so I mentioned there's the story game that Dawn and Cora are working on called Amnesia. That's going to be really fun. I don't want to say a whole lot about it yet, but I think we're going to be putting out ways for people to test that pretty soon.
Okay.
And it's going to be like a party game. And projects in general. So I also have early next year, we need to finish this Kickstarter before I get onto anything too heavy myself. But pretty much as soon as that's done, I'm going to start putting together all of my notes and start calling people like you. I'd actually like to have you on it. For a stream that we're going to do, which is Gamers in the Apocalypse. And this is a horror-based genre, really focusing on gamers, but we'll also talk about movies, books, comics, anything that has to do with the creepy that we all love. A lot of us, anyway, love to get involved with and read and watch and play and stuff like that. And I'm going to get hopefully great guests like you and the guys from Parlor Gaming that are working on the post-apocalyptic game Retroscape, and going to all the cons and stuff. And I know you have probably the same experience. We get to meet lots of interesting folks that are in the industry. So I'm going to take advantage of that and try and get some of them here at the house and some of them online, and just talk to different writers and game designers and stuff like that are involved or at least interested in the apocalypse and werewolves and vampires and all that creepy stuff.
I would love to be on your show, and I could talk about 80s post-apocalyptic movies for a long time. So
that's probably what you and I should do. We'll spend part of the time talking about our gaming stuff, and the rest of it'll be going down the list of I love this.
Yeah. That would be great. And I should probably just have you back on my show, and maybe we can just do a rundown of some of those movies on my show as well, because some of those things, if people haven't seen them, they're missing out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can certainly, we'll run out of time before we run out of conversation on the subject. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and sadly, we're running out of time right now. I will go ahead and make sure that Crypt Monkey Studios is linked up in the show notes to this episode at dicegeeks.com, so everybody can find out what you are up to. Are there any other websites that somebody who's interested in your work should check out?
I think the main one right now is you'd want to go to cryptmonkeygames.com, and that talks about the games we've released, and as we're getting closer to testing and things like that, you'll be able to find information on that there, as well as we open up the site for Amnesia should be open up probably before the end of this year, I would think. And The Dark After, it has its own website, thedarkafter.com, but there's not a lot there yet.
All right. Well, I will make sure, like I said, to link all those up in the show notes. So I just want to thank you for being on the show today. Thank you, Ty.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ty today. In the show notes for this episode, you will be able to find links for all of his games and projects. Also, while Ty and I were chatting, we have pretty much determined that I will have him back on the show, and we will do a giant post-apocalyptic movie geek out because that is what guys like us do. So I hope that will make you stick around until we can record that episode. Now, if you want some free stuff, please go to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get 10 free dungeon maps plus some other resources, and you will never miss an episode of this show. Also, if you would consider supporting this show on Patreon, that would mean the world to me. So you can go to patreon.com/dicegeeks. Any support there will just help me know that there are people out there that want me to continue making this show. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep gaming.